So we both spent the weekend diving into this 7th installment in this long-running series. They're making some pretty significant changes to the formula. This isn't really like a Civ 6 situation where like there was a lot of these good incremental improvements. They are really like swinging for the fences here with this one. I guess to make it feel like a proper sequel. They changed up quite a bit. So after spending a few days with the game, we're not entirely convinced that all of these changes or shakeups really work or are necessary or even feel quite like Civilization. Not to say that this game feels totally different from your average Civ. It doesn't go that far. There's a lot of positives, but some of the things that they've done with Civ 7 are pretty drastic alterations to the usual formula. Look, even as more casual Civ enjoyers here, some of the stuff they've done here feels like they're moving the design away from the things that we all loved about Civilization in a way that feels counterproductive. It's a complicated thing because in a way you got to respect the hustle. I mean, like we're at the 7th entry of the series, and like if you're gonna have to charge between $70 to $130 for the game, which is already rough. I mean, seriously, trying to pull like NBA 2K style inflated prices for Civ games of all things, that's bad enough. But like if they are going to charge that much, then I get that they want to make the game feel unique and offer something truly new compared to previous entries in this long-running series, but I'm just not sure if this was the way to do it. So what did they change? Well, there's a lot, so stick with us. The biggest and the most controversial, at least to us, is the new Ages system, which splits any given Civ game you play through here into 3 distinct ages: the Age of Antiquity, the Age of Exploration, and the Modern Age. I'll get into more detail later, but this completely unends the usual structure of these games by making each era have their own special mechanics and objectives. And more importantly, every player advances to the next era at the same time. There's a lot I have to say about this, but let me finish running down all the other changes before trying to dissect all of that. So leaders and civilizations are chosen separately here. That's another big thing, with leaders no longer being representative of their civilizations, and instead have their own unique bonuses that they bring in separate from each civ. So now you can kind of mix and match them for maximum synergy or weird strategies, or just make wild history combinations like Benjamin Franklin leading the Mongol horde or whatever. And speaking of, a significant change here, a lot of the leaders you select in Civ 7, like the aforementioned Benjamin Franklin, you know, he was more of a thinker, Machiavelli, Harriet Tubman, all leaders and pioneers in their own right, but not necessarily commanding massive armies or empires. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's like we've had a million Roman emperors and stuff like that at this point, so shining a light on different historical characters is always cool. But an odd thing about the leaders is that there are more than one of the same guy sometimes. Like, I get the basic idea that leaders wear many hats and there were different eras of leadership in them, but it still feels kind of cheap. Like, this is how they're going to sneak in lots of DLC with the game, like with alternate leaders, rather than making entirely new ones with new models and new voices and animations and stuff. Anyway, but the rest of the changes are smaller, but still significant for longtime series fans, like the removal of barbarians and changing up how city-states work, replacing them with new independent powers, which sort of combine aspects of both and are generally just more interesting, and like some are hostile to you while others aren't, and it's possible to become allies with these groups and eventually incorporate them into your Civ a little bit in a way that feels kind of natural and makes the early game experience more interesting than just like, uh-oh, another barbarian camp, time to kill it or avoid it completely. Like, credit to them, how the independent powers work now, like it feels natural. It feels like something that's kind of been around already. Warfare has been very smartly streamlined here, in our opinion, with the addition of the commander unit that can combine several units into one to allow faster movement. But then to do this, you need to pack units together to move and unpack them to fight. While an army is still in formation, it's vulnerable. The commander can level up, and each one has their own skill tree that's a little awkward to navigate, but I'll get into the UI issues later. For the most part, we really like this change. Like, it adds a pretty nice strategic layer to combat and makes moving your army less of a chore, so that's always a win. And another positive to combat, you can actually flank enemies now, like attack them from the sides or back and lock them in to get damage bonuses. Now, this is something the series has needed ever since it changed up like how the individual units work. work. Other Civ games have had flanking buffs as like a promotion or like bonus type things, if I do remember correctly. But here, the way it's implemented, it just feels like a more tangible, full mechanic. Diplomacy has been reworked to use the new resource called influence rather than just gold. This is another change that I mostly like, along with the removal of builders, which streamlines city building somewhat. That's really good. The thing is, religious victory conditions are out, and the entire religion system has kind of been simplified into oblivion. It's a mechanic that really is seemingly only relevant in the age of exploration for whatever reason, and it's much less complicated than how it works in Civ 6, which is for the best to us, because religion just kind of needlessly complicated things in that game and always felt kind of vestigial. So maybe cutting off that extraneous extra limb was the right move. Lastly, they did decide to go kind of full paradox and add in this emergent narrative system right out of something like Crusader Kings. Sometimes the game gives you a narrative choice that pops up that you can make to change the direction of your Civ, which might sound like a big deal, like a game changer, but it's not. It's pretty bare bones, a very simple implementation of this idea. Just, it shows up, pick whichever reward you want for these choices, and move on. It seems like they don't really add too much more one way or the other. Now, there's a lot more little things that got changed, but those are the big ones I think worth highlighting top level. And overall, while together they sound like positive changes, they might be for some people, but and yes, the incremental stuff I like. A lot of this stuff does feel inspired by Civ competitors like Humankind and Age of Wonders games and all those Paradox grand strategy games. It makes Civ feel a little bit like it's not the innovator, it's not the pioneer. Like, this series used to be the trendsetter, but now it kind of feels like it's borrowing ideas from other games and not necessarily really convincing us that the stuff they're borrowing fits what people really actually want out of this series. Of course, that's pretty subjective, and like I said, this change up for Civ might be for some people, it might be a good different flavor for them, but we're not necessarily convinced that the stuff they're borrowing fits what people actually want out of the series. But of course, that's pretty subjective because all different types of people play Civ games and may want different things out of it. But before we get into the real negatives, we do want to give praise to the visuals here, which, at least on the map screen, do look pretty great. I like how detailed your cities are now and how each city really looks like it belongs to your chosen civilization, and how they put a lot of work and detail into making each type of city look distinct and feel different, and we like that. The leaders also look better than last year. Yes, they still look a little cartoony, in the way they animate and stuff like that. It's kind of just a Civ thing at this point. I know some people don't like it, but hey, it works. And performance-wise, I did have one hard crash to desktop transitioning from one age to another, which was kind of hilarious, but I didn't lose my save, and I wasn't able to get it to happen again. I had no other issues. So other than that, performance-wise on our ends, on two computers, we didn't have any issues. Of course, everybody's rig is different, so make sure you look into some other reviewers, but also the ultra-wide looks nice. It's really nicely laid out. The music also is very well done. I don't think it's quite as iconic as some of the classic game soundtracks, and I think that goes down to the narration as well, with Gwendolyn Christie doing the voiceover this time. Still, they're definitely going for this classical but cultural vibe with the soundscape, which we do like, but the actual sound effects, less so. It feels like a lot is missing. It's very flat. The audio cues for a lot of things just aren't really there anymore, and it makes the game feel flat and incomplete. Like I said, the lack of sounds and the weirdly bad UI design really damage what is otherwise a nice looking game. Now, again, we've brought it up a million times, the UI, the user interface, the layout of everything, really how things are organized and readable and legible, all that stuff, it's pretty rough. Normally, it's something that we give a pass for, but because we're in game 7 of this series, this is not their first rodeo, and they already have the template for creating a better UI with the old games, which had far more usable presentation. Very little information is given to you in an easy to find way. Sometimes pop-ups just don't show up, or even worse, certain tutorials just will not go away with no option to remove them. Seriously, this is a game primarily about looking at a map and clicking on things in menus. How are the menus this inconsistent and confusingly organized? Some of them have completely different looks and feels and vibes to them. We understand that they're trying to make the game look more streamlined with less visual clutter, and of course it's an uphill battle because these games add more and more mechanics and information, but still, here the end result is that they've made a UI that just feels half finished. It looks like it's like a placeholder in an early access game. This is something Firaxis has already said they plan on fixing in March at the earliest, and who's to say their fixes will actually make the UI that significantly better. This is one aspect of the game for us here personally, like it's just a straight up downgrade from the previous games. The UI is rough. It doesn't render the game unplayable or anything, but we just think it should be a lot better. Now, the UI is not good, but that whole ages system we alluded to earlier on, that system is more complex. We've definitely got mixed feelings about it. Look, I like that each age has its own mechanics. Antiquity is early game Civ, like you'd expect, but the Age of Exploration brings in colonization mechanics and this whole distant lands thing where you're actually incentivized to send ships out over deep water and explore and exploit and exterminate in the new world. It's like a new way of encouraging you to get out there, where in a normal Civ playthrough, you have your own free will and you can either do it or not. Every map is generated with continents separated to allow for this type of thing in Age of Exploration. The modern age switches things up again with trains and industrialization. In theory, these are great changes because it makes each age feel much more distinct than in older games. It really feels like your civilization is advancing in this system, but there's a lot about it that can get in the way of the fun. The fact that everybody advances at the same time just doesn't feel quite Civ to us. Now, with each age, everyone starts on the same playing field. All units are automatically converted into whatever tier 1 units are available in that next age, and it's still kind of hard to understand how this actually works. Like, your commanders always carry over, but some of your units don't. It's just not clear to us after a couple playthroughs, like, we don't really know how the game determines what does and doesn't carry over between ages. I mean, I know that ageless buildings remain, but what about certain resources? I don't know. The way it seems here, it just seems needlessly complicated and some of it just kind of hidden or vague. The idea with the game being reset to an extent with each new age is to spread out those first few magical hours of a Civ game across an entire campaign as a pacing thing. But I don't know. Like, I half expect a lot of people to just kind of give up once they hit the next age because the big reset for the first time is kind of confusing and disheartening. It's like, wait, what just happened? I have to figure all this crap out now? What happened to all my stuff? It's not that bad once you actually dive in and assess the damage from the transition, but at first it can be kind of weird. And that's not even like our biggest issue with the whole system. Yes, mechanically it can be kind of confusing, but you just have to learn and figure it out. But it just kind of feels like it flies in the face of what Civ stands for, at least to us. Like one of those defining elements of Civ is just sending Navy SEAL soldiers to fight cavemen. They specifically designed ages to eliminate that snowballing where one player can potentially have this massive advantage over another. But that's just part of the magic of these games. It's a problem that, in our opinion, didn't really need to be fixed. That feeling of an unbroken passage of time just like isn't in this game anymore. You don't really get to feel like you're playing this cohesive, lengthy Civ because every civilization is unique to each age. So you can't just play Rome from ancient times up to modern. Instead, you're almost always forced into bizarre combinations like Greece, and then suddenly you're Normans, and then like your Imperial France. Look, I know it doesn't make any sense, but it seems like it's all in service of changing the gameplay, like shaking things up, keeping the pacing fresh, but again, it just doesn't feel quite right. Look, at the end of the day, this is also still Civilization, and once we got past that initial annoyance with the UI and my dislike of some of the big picture changes, we still ended up spending way too long playing the game and getting stuck in that one more turn mentality that this series is so famous for. It got its hooks in us despite everything, which really is just a testament to the power of the core game. There is still Civ here, and it is still good enough. Like the fact that we just complain about all those things and then still ended up dumping a ton of hours in it does say a lot. Also, the fact that they throw this like annoying pop-up ad at you every single time, like you're in the main menu to sign up for a 2K account. Look, you can play the game in offline mode, but there's no need for that kind of aggressive advertising in a Civ game, man. Come on. Look, again, we've spent a lot of this review complaining, but there is a lot we like about the game. Combat is the series' best. The changes to barbarians has been a long time coming. The new mechanics for for each age are generally pretty interesting and thematic, and we like the idea behind each age ending in a crisis that you have to weather, technically. But there are a lot of things that drag the experience down, like we mentioned, like the bad UI, the practically non-existent world generation options, man. Like, we didn't even really get into that, but like, you can't even make a large world map. It cuts you off at normal. It just feels very content light, options light. In general, there's not really a lot of customization options. You can't even name your cities. Yes, you can name your religion, but that barely even matters anymore. Again, the core Civ stuff is still fun, and honestly, if this was called anything other than Civilization, we'd probably be fine with a lot of it. Hell, maybe even enthusiastic about it. But the Civilization name, it comes with a lot of expectations lumped on it. And we're still not sure if that ages system change up is a good idea that needs some work, or if it's just fatally flawed. The ages system, I think, is something, if you're like a Civ player, you've enjoyed a couple of them, you have to be in the mood for this because it is a shakeup, and I feel like you need to go into it thinking it's like an alternate game mode. If that's enough for you, like if you really want to go out and spend full price on that, we ain't stopping you. I think its current state, like, it just deviates a little too far from the sort of thing that we're looking for in these games. And look, at a more reasonable price point, we might be willing to recommend it. But with so many caveats, as of right now, we're marking it as like a maybe wait, or at the very least, if you're a Civ fan and you've heard some of the things and you're not too sure about it, maybe read a couple of other reviews, watch a playthrough or something like that, because it's unconventional. Long story short, a new flavor or variant of Civ that may or may not be for you. It's really down to the individual player. But hey, that's it before you buy. You know how this works by now. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion, and now we want to hear yours down in the comments. I'd love to know your experience with this series. Maybe you started with the early days, maybe you're in 4, 5, or 6. Let's talk about anything Civ at all down in the comments. If you did jump into 7, would love to hear your first impressions as well. And if you like this video and maybe it helped inform your purchase or anything like that, clicking the like button helps us out. We really appreciate it. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
Greetings. I am Benjamin Franklin, doctor, scientist, writer, and full of advice, whether you will listen or not.